Welcome to week 6. Today we're going to be talking about using PHP with MySQL. My name's Charles William Marshall. Go by Bill. That's my email address and cell phone for use during office hours. If this raises questions, please email me and let's set up a time we can have a Microsoft team meeting to see how we can clarify. Alright, so it's for CIT 253. It's a 3-credit hour course named Data Driven Web Pages. And as always, Blackboard is the official site for assignments and to turn in assignments. And you can get supplemental information at cwmclass.com. Alright, so early on we've got to make a decision between PDO versus MySQLi. When accessing a database with PHP, you really have just two choices. And so let's go over a summary. PDO works with 12 different database drivers. MySQL works with only MySQL. Now, I have used PDO in other places, and being able to go across 12 different databases really sounds neat. But in the real world, each database is unique enough with its SQL calls that you really can't transport code very well, and you're going to find out that you pretty much pick a database and then stay on it. And so you don't port around between databases very often unless you have some really strange situation or you're reselling your application to users. So never say never, but that one's not as big to me as it might be to other folks. The API, you can either have object-oriented programming or you can have procedural with MySQL. What is object-oriented programming? It refers to a type of computer programming software design in which the programmers define the data type of a data structure and also the types of operations, functions that can be applied to the data structure. Connection, they're both pretty easy to connect. Name parameters, PDO can do it, MySQL cannot. PDO has a binding parameter where you have params equals array and you give a variable type and the data for that variable and a variable type and the name for that, and the variable type and the name for that. So you do a PDO prepare, select from users, and notice that they're using these data types that they were getting passed in, and then you execute it. The advantage of doing a prepare statement from the client is that if you know you're going to loop through something, the advantage of doing a prepare statement anytime is that each time a database interacts with a SQL statement, it's got what it calls an optimizer, where it goes out and tries to figure out, okay, what keys am I going to use and what's the very best way that I can do this. And that has overhead. And so if you know that your application is going to ask for the same prepare statement 50 times, or the same SQL statement 50 times, if you prepare it once, you save 49 hits of that overhead. That's good. Some database, there's other ways to skin the rabbit that would get deeper into databases than we may want to go right now, but that's what they're doing. They're being able to, from the client side, to prepare an SQL statement that they know they're going to call many times, and that's an advantage. The MySQL way is that you give it a query and you can still prepare it, but now you're given it with question marks. And then when you want to bind the parameters, you have to say SS test mail and time, and you execute. And the problem is, if you get 50 lines down in the code and get them in the wrong order, it doesn't care. It's going to take the first thing it gives and thinks it's username, and the second thing it's going to think is email, and the third thing it thinks it's going to see is last login. So username might be SS, but I doubt that test is the email. I would bet that mail is the email, and so you're going to try to pass test into email, and it's not going to be real happy with that. And then you execute it. And so the question marks parameter binding might seem shorter, but it isn't nearly as flexible as name parameters. And due to the fact that the developer must always keep track of the parameter order, it feels hacky in some circumstances, and you can get in deep trouble. Okay, object mapping. Yes, they both do object mapping. Prepare statements. You can do them on the client side. With PDO, you can't do them on the MySQL. Prepared statement is a feature used to execute the same or similar SQL statements repeatedly with high efficiency, and we've kind of talked about that already. Prepared statements are basically work like prepare an SQL statement. Template is created and sent to the database, and certain values are left unspecified and called parameters. Alright, performance, they're both fast, and stored procedures, they both have the ability to do stored procedures. And a stored procedure is a subroutine available to the application that accesses a relational database management system. All this came out of Wikipedia, by the way. Such procedures are stored in the database data dictionary, and using a stored procedure includes the data validation or access control mechanisms are used in. So when would you do that? Well, if I know that each time I run I'm going to call it 50 times, it makes sense to prepare it. But if I know that 1 million people are going to be running it, and each of them are going to call it 50 times, wouldn't it be nice to put it through the optimizer once and never have to do 50 times 1 million different optimizations? And that's the advantage of a stored procedure. They both do it. Alright, so I made an instructor decision. For uniformity in this class, we will use Object-Oriented MySQL. And I confess, the reason I did that is because MySQL is already installed with the steps we went to put in our web server and technology stack, and it seemed to me to be the course of least resistance, and I think it will meet all our needs. So we're using Object-Oriented MySQL from here on out. And if you want to write, when you write your own pages and databases and you want to use one of the other variations, that's great, because hopefully this has helped you understand the advantages of each. Alright, so let's make a connection. We're going to do something like MySQLi equals a new MySQL. So we're making a new of class MySQL, and we've got to pass it the localhost, the username, the password, and the database. You ought to look at the MySQL manual and learn about object-oriented interface for access the database if you haven't already. And the point is, this lecture should not be your only touch point for how to use MySQLi. What I'm trying to do is get you an overview and get you started, hopefully increase your curiosity enough that you want to go out and learn more yourself. Alright, so connect to the database. We're going to say new MySQL localhost, username, password, database. We're going to see if we got any errors on the connection. So if we call the connect error value out of this class we just created, if it comes back true, then we're going to say failed connection to MySQL and then give them the error information. If we were going to write a query, we would say we're creating a new variable. Don't you love the fact that you can use variables that you haven't created in PHP? Good news and bad news. So this class, we're going to do a query, and the value we're going to query looks like that. Now, if you look at some places on the web, they'll say select star from table name, and select star is I would advocate that you always call out the fields that you want. One reason is that you may be into a table. Sometimes it has 150 columns. You really don't need to pass all that data back and forth, and it may be data that you really don't want to expose to the outside. So you're much better off calling specific column values that you want, or field values. The other thing is why it's good practice to use it with a select. When you get to an insert or an update, you absolutely positively should never use update star. It will ruin your day in so many ways that it's just not, if somebody changes the database, all the programs that you've got update star in just broke. And you may get some really interesting occurrences. Well, the first thing is, if they changed it in such a way that you still have the same number of columns, your insert may actually work, but it won't put it where you thought it was. So I advocate that you always define the rows that you're talking about, or the field names that you're talking about in SQL statements. All right, so then we're going to fetch a query, and so this class we created up here, we're going to fetch the associated, which is going to bring us in one row. And then we can echo the row, the value table ID, and then we want to close the database. It's always nice to close your database connection. As you write bigger and bigger programs, it's really bad when you run out of connections because you didn't close the database. It takes resources. The other point is that you may have opened up a database, and if you're using transactions, closing that data is a way to force the commit work on that transaction. And I'm not going to go any deeper into that, but you should make it a point of always closing anything you open. And you're maybe from the country, and if you were raised on a farm like I was, they always said close a gate when you go through a gate. And so if you opened a table, you ought to close the table. All right. I would have you look at W3 Schools tutorial. That's the URL to it. I'm not going to read it to you because you can get the PowerPoint and cut and paste. And it has this information on the side, and I would advocate that you need to go through and look at those and make sure that the concepts make sense to you. Again, do not memorize syntax. You're trying to learn concepts. When you're programming, you're going to be sitting at a computer with the internet. You can look up the commas and the dashes and so forth whenever you need them, but learn the concepts of what they're doing. All right. So start with the MySQL Content Connect, which is that link, and work down through MySQL Limit Data, which is that link. So we're talking about starting here and going down to there. So now we want to use PHP to dynamically build a web page with no data passed in on the call. So every time we make this call, it's not going to know anything except that there's a set routine it wants to go through. If we change data on the server side, the page generated will change. But there's nothing the user on the client side is going to do to impact that. Okay, what we want is a web page listing the state code and name. So here is the code that I started with, and what I've done here is just try to do the very first part. I just want to see if I can connect, because getting it to connect is a major accomplishment, and then we can work on trying to get fancy with doing something. And notice that because I'm never going to use a table, I don't have to give it a database. I'm simply connecting to the server to see if I can get into it. And when I ran it, I got this result. And if you look, I misspelled root password. Now I understand that's not a very secure password, but for these class type things, I try to make a password that's not anything I would ever use. And so I misspelled the word password, and the program hit the error part of the code and told me that. I went back and changed password, and it gave me what I'd hoped it would do. So here's the complete source code. We defined the local host, the server name, the user, the password, the DB name I'm going to use. I'm not going to, because now I'm getting ready to need a table. I've got a connection. Well, I'm creating a variable with this class, and I'm checking to make sure it worked. And I did it wrapped it around this way just because of being able to read the screen. I'm setting up a variable SQL, and it's equal to select state code, comma, state name from state demo. Note the semicolon. And result equals the connection, firing the query with that string. And if result number of rows is greater than 0, then I'm a happy camper and things worked. So I'm going to come down here with this comment of output each data. And now I'm going to have a while statement. And the while statement is because I'm getting one row each time with this result fetch associated. So when I hit it the first time, I'm fetching the first row, and I know there's going to be at least one because I checked to make sure that there was at least one. And if it hits, if that while works, which we know it's going to work once, I'm going to echo and a string ID colon dot, which is how you concatenate strings in PHP. This value row, square bracket, the value of the field that I want to put there in square bracket, dot, another concatenation, another text string, dot, another concatenation, dollar row, which is back here, the field state name, and then a break, so I get a new line on the web page. And so it's going to keep running that while from here to here until it didn't find anything, till the fetch gives it a false, and then it's going to fall out. If we came here and it didn't find any rows, it would have said 0 rows. Alright, and then as a good camper, I'm going to connection close. I'm going to echo successfully listed states, and I'm out the back of the program, or the PHP code. Alright, so if I put in the wrong database name, and you can see here the first time I ran it I had Marshall 0050, it gives me this, which is helpful, more helpful than just blowing up. So I've gone back and changed it to C Marshall. And just so you know that there's no magic going on here is the Notepad Plus on the Windows 10 machine, where I've keyed all this in and saved it as my program, MySQLi program 1. And when I run it against localhost, it does what I wanted it to do. Now, could we do a lot of more formatting and centering and tables and all sorts of stuff? Yes. You're now into just how much time do you want to spend on your HTML, and you're going to do all that right here. But this code is generating HTML, which the server is passing back to the client, and the client's interpreting. Alright, week 6, assignment 1. I want you to create a PHP file called contact list. I want it to generate a web page that lists contacts in alphabetical order by contact name last. Now, the notation I'm using when I'm talking about a field is table name dot field name. And I want to have these columns listed on each line for each contact, each line that represents a contact. I want contact name last, then I want contact name first, and I want state demo state name, which means that in this file, except you're going to first have opened up the contact, you're going to then inside that while open a contact and use the value you got from the contact to look up state. And so you're going to go through and you don't really have to while in there because you know there's only going to be one state. And that's how you will be able to build what I'm asking for. All right, and so that's your starting point. And again, inside this file, you're going to have another create another connection because you have a unique, you don't need another connection, but you do need to create another one of these where you're working with a table because you're selecting from a different table now. So you're going to have result 1 or something like that and bury all that logic from result down through close. Down through here inside the while statement. So you read a connection and then you read a state and then you echo out what you want, which falls out and goes back, you read another connection and so forth. Your second assignment is to turn in the current work in process version of your class project. And when I say work in progress version of class project, what am I talking about? Well, you need a problem statement, and by that I mean, what's the objective? And if you can't state what your objective is in one paragraph, you haven't thought about it enough because you need to get it concise so that it clearly states what your objective is. You need business rules, and by that I mean what constraints accomplishing your objective. Well, the people only work from 8 to 5. I need to be able to deal with customers in Canada and the United States, and I don't know what you're doing, I don't know what all your constraints are, but your business rules are a checklist that if you took them to the users or the consumers of this and said, if we can do all this, will we meet the objective? And if they said yes, you have your business rules. If they don't say yes, and if they have something else, you need to add it. Now, sadly, what you will find out is that you will ask and talk to the customers and you'll think you have all their business rules, and when you roll the thing out the first time, you'll find out that, oh, well, we forgot to tell you that on Tuesdays of the 3rd week of the 2nd month, thus and such happens. That's why it's imperative that you not try to go for a big bang solution where you don't show anybody anything until it's ready to turn on. But just as we tried to see if we could connect to a database before we tried to read a table, as you're working through your project, you ought to figure out ways that you can have a little bit of it work so that you can be looking at your users and saying, yeah, now this is where we're headed. Is this what you had in mind? And the ERD for the class project. And by that, what I'm talking about is using Toad to lay out your data and your relationships so we can see what data structure you'll use to support. And we've been talking about this. We're in week 6, and we've been talking about this. And you've got 10 weeks left, and you really ought to be getting this level of the project pretty well whipped up into shape, because what we're going to do most of the time remaining is actually implementing the tools that you've been learning. And if you don't know where you're headed, you're going to not be able to be doing things that take you towards your objective. All right. Next week, we're going to start moving data from the client to the server. To date, we've been telling you how to get data from the server out to the client. A primary concern must be to prevent SQL and data injection. SQL injection is bad, and it's really bad, and it gets worse, and it's just terrible, and it's something you want to avoid. So what is SQL injection? Well, SQL injection is a hacking technique which attempts to pass SQL commands through web applications for execution on the back-end database. And you ought to check out this link and that link to get more details. I'm not going to take you through all those step by step, but data injection is terrible. It can ruin a business, it can ruin a website, and you need to be cognizant of it. And I think these two will get you started on that path. But anytime you're doing anything with data and web, you ought to be thinking about how can I ensure that I don't have any SQL injection. That's week 6, using PHP with MySQL. If you have questions, that's my email address. Cell phone during office hours. I encourage you to send me an email and tell me a time that would be good for you, and let's see if we can get together. I'm sure we can find some time that suits us both. I'll set up a Microsoft Team meeting, and that way you and I can see each other's screens. And don't forget that we need to be having a 15-minute check-in each week, just so that we can be sure that I'm answering your questions. There's many ways to explain this, and if after listening to my explanation you're still unclear on something, that just means that I haven't explained it well enough. Because anything that is understood is simple, and up until then it's convoluted and complex and non-intuitive and so forth. So I need your help to make sure that we get it to where to you it makes sense. Thank you.